Welcome. We're going to cover Chapter 9. We're going to get into some network risk management, otherwise known as security. All right, so part of risk management is dealing with the people, technology, and other risk, security risk to a network. We'll cover some tools to help us evaluate our security of our network and discuss some physical security methods that help prevent and detect intrusions. Learn how to configure devices to increase our security on our networks, and discuss and describe some security policies. Explain how they can help guide users' activity on the network when they have questions on what they should or shouldn't do. Everybody's probably very aware of the term of a hacker, but originally it just meant someone who was really good or a master of computer hardware and software, and they used their skills to better understand computer hardware and software. However, today it's used to describe somebody who gains unauthorized access or breaks the security of other companies to do harm. But originally it was actually a good term. Just meant somebody was highly skilled. And we do still have those hackers that are called white hat hackers. They're our IT experts, hired by organizations to help identify vulnerabilities and help protect against the black hat hackers, which are those that are trying to cause damage, steal data, compromise privacy, or to do harm, basically. That's the black hat. And then a gray hat hacker is somebody that is somewhere in between, a white and black hat hacker. They live by their own ethics, and so it may or may not be legal all the time. And they may engage in illegal activities, but their intent is to educate and assist others. So that's why they're the gray hat. So let's identify some terms, right? So a vulnerability is a weakness in a system or process or architecture. So it's just it's vulnerable to an attack. It's weak in some area. An exploit is when you've actually taken advantage of an existing vulnerability. So say the OS, it could be Mac, Linux, Windows, it doesn't matter. Say they have a software vulnerability, and it's vulnerable to attack, but it doesn't necessarily mean anybody's going to do anything until someone exploits it and actually uses the vulnerability to gain access. A 0-day exploit or 0-day attack takes advantage of an unknown vulnerability. So the vulnerability was there, the attacker finds it and exploits it before anyone knew that it existed. So it's the developer, the manufacturer is unaware of this vulnerability, and all of a sudden the system's compromised. This is called a 0-day exploit or a 0-day attack. So malicious and determined intruders may use one technique, which allows them to use a second technique, right, and to support thirds or so on, right? So they're hackers and that are looking for a way in to elevate their access, right? So once they get elevated access, then they can run their other tools and techniques. So that's how it kind of works in steps, right? So maybe they're able to take advantage of a vulnerability in a printer and be able to get access to the network from the printer. And then from there, gain access to a server, or maybe even a workstation, and then get access to the server where it has the data that they were actually originally going after. So hacking usually is incremental steps. Right, and most of our security breaches, at least more than half, are caused by human errors, ignorance, or omissions. Right, it's the human factor. A lot of system compromisation is done due to human error. Social engineering, right, is a way to exploit humans, to basically hack a human. And to gain access, either to gain a password or gain information that helps the hacker get in, gain access, or get a person to click a link that then compromises the system, or things like that. I mean, that's social engineering, or calling people, having them give their credit card information, saying that they're Microsoft and they need technical support because their computer's compromised. These are like social engineering techniques that are used. But right, so phishing, right, that, like I said, with the email, or trying to get them to click on things and go somewhere, baiting, promising them a gift card or something, right, and getting them to go somewhere. Quid pro quo, well, you do this for me, I'll do this for you, and then tailgating, following somebody in a secured area, right? So carrying a box, and then somebody holds the door open for them, and when they don't have access, things like that. Here's an example of a phishing email. It often will look legitimate, like it's coming from a trusted company like Microsoft or Apple, or a bank, and they'll have the official looking logos, the buttons, instructions look great, maybe even the fine print, but the link doesn't go to the company, it goes somewhere else. And they're expecting you to hopefully put in your credit card information or something like that, or bank account information. Right, so training is our biggest defense against social engineering, letting people aware of common tricks and exploits that hackers are trying to use on them. We have insider threat, right? Someone who's trusted by the organization, and you may have malicious intent. They didn't get their promotion or something like that, right? They may do harm maliciously or seek out to do some harm from within. They get let go and give a 2-week notice or something, and then they do something and leave a like what's called like a time bomb. At certain date, it does something like delete data or something like that. I mean, there's a lot of insider threats that can happen. Some ways to reduce it is doing some background checks for new hires. It's not going to catch everybody, especially those that get passed over for promotion and decide that they've had enough or whatever. But some background checks could help. Principle of least privileges, right? Giving minimal access to do their job, just enough to do the job and nothing more. That helps. Checks and balances on employee behavior, not allowing a single employee the rights to do everything. Like, so maybe in a situation where you're issuing checks or dealing with money or something, there's approval processes, and there's more than one person. There might be 2 or 3 people that are in an approval process that review before any money is sent out or anything like that. So checks and balances on employee behavior. A big red flag can be an employee that never takes time off. There could be some fraud that's going on. Things like that you need to be careful of. And then data loss prevention is a solution that tags sensitive information and warns and or prevents it from being copied or taken off the company's network. We have some risks that are just built in our networking, especially with the IPv4. It was not designed to be secure. So we have some spoofing attacks where somebody may actually pretend to be somebody else's MAC address, because there's software out there that you can change the MAC address that appears in your packets. Denial of service attacks, so hackers can flood or do all kinds of nasty attacks and overwhelm our servers with broadcast pings. Distributed DOS attack is, instead of just using their machine, they take over or other people's computers, maybe home user computers, and use them as what's called zombies. And then so they have hundreds or thousands of machines hitting a server and running denial of service attacks. So it's a distributed DOS. And then another one is a distributed reflector. Is you still use the zombies, and you send information, but you tell them to reply to the target. So you send out all these ping requests or whatever to all kinds of computers, and you have it reply back to the target, and then it just gets flooded. The target gets flooded with all the responses. And then amplified distributed reflector, and it just uses small, simple requests that trigger very large responses from the target. And so it just goes on. There's just different variations, but you're basically just overwhelming the target of the attack with either requests or responses. So here's just your typical DOS attack, flooding a web server. So just sending a bunch of synchronization, the TCP IP handshake, the first part of the handshake, to the web server. Here is distributed, right? So instead of using their own machine, there's affecting zombies and sending the same commands. And then here's the distributed response attack, right? So you're sending the echo request to all these computers, and then but you tell them that the web server sent the request, and so they reply to the web server and then overwhelm the web server. And then same thing. This one is doing ping, right, and saying that the web server is doing the ping. Whereas this one is using DNS, it's doing a DNS lookup and saying the web server is doing the lookup, and so they're sending the responses back to the web server. Right, so risk inherent in the network hardware, right? So a permanent DOS attack could damage the device's firmware beyond repair. A friendly DOS was, as a denial of service that was done, but it was done unintentionally. So something like running a security scan can actually take down a network and a server. You may be intending to do some scanning to see if there's something going wrong, and you could actually be the problem and actually cause a denial of service attack. DNS poisoning or DNS spoofing, right? So being able to alter the DNS records on a DNS server. So say, if you compromise Google's DNS records and point it to, Apple or something, right? That could be an attack. If you can actually change the IP addresses of where, some website points to, or you could change, to your site, send all the traffic from Google to your site so you get all the ad revenue or whatever, right? Or maybe you can hack a bank and have it directed to your website that looks just like the bank, and you get all the account information. Um, Art poisoning. So, right, the attackers use fake art replies to alter the art tables, trying to get data to them. So that they want to put their MAC address in the art tables, so that their machine gets the data, from the server instead of your computer or somebody's computer. Man in the middle attacks, right? So they're able to somehow insert themselves in between the conversation between a server and a computer, for example, and then intercept the transmissions. So one example of this is, you may be thinking you're connecting to a Wi-Fi hotspot, when in fact you're connecting to a hacker's Wi-Fi, and so then when you connect to your bank, you think you're doing a secure connection to the bank, but you're actually not. You're connecting to your bank in clear text because you're going through the Wi-Fi hotspot of the hacker, and they're grabbing all your information, because they're attacking, doing the man in the middle attack. And then we could have rogue DHCP servers, right? So they could, once again, to try to do the man in the middle, issuing you IPs on their network and their gateway, so everything goes through them. And so you want to monitor your DHCP and use the IPDHP snooping command, right, to make sure this isn't happening. And sometimes this could also bring down your network inadvertently. So when I was at the school district, I would have teachers bring their home router in because they wanted to do wireless in their room, but they had DHCP turned on, and then they would start handing out IP addresses to other classrooms, and then the other classrooms would stop working because they had the wrong IP address, because they were getting the DHCP from this rogue DHCP server. So it wasn't an intentional attack, but it still nonetheless impacted the network. A deauthentication attack. They send fake deauthentication frames to the access point or client or both to trigger the deauthentication process and knock one or more clients off the wireless network. Just to be annoying, I guess. I mean, it's not anything other than, or maybe they want you to re-authenticate and they're going to try and capture that re-authentication process as well. And then we've got a slew of completely insecure protocols like FTP and HTTP, Telnet. These all send everything in the clear. Then you got SLIP, TFTP, SNMP version 1 and version 2. They're very insecure protocols. And then backdoors are basically ways into a system to gain access for unauthorized users. And so a lot of times hackers will, once they can compromise your system with one exploit, they know that exploit may not stay there forever. You may eventually patch it. So they'll install software that allows them backdoor access at any time, regardless if you patch or not. until you delete the software, but you may not know the software was installed. So they'll create what are called back doors, ways back in that are easier next time. And then we have malicious software that are just designed to do harm. Examples are viruses, worms, bots, ransomware, Trojan horses. Typically, Trojan horses are software that looks like useful software, but they install backdoors or other things. The payload is something else. But the design is to make it look like it's something usable, or maybe it's a free movie of some new movie that's out, and you download the movie, you play the movie, and it actually installs some other software onto your system. Viruses are replicating programs intended to infect more computers, and they replicate through network connections or exchanges of data. Trojan horses, right? As I said, they're just disguise itself as something useful, but it actually is not the intent of the program. Is designed to do something else and fool you. Worms are similar to viruses, but they run independently and travel between computer and don't require user action, where viruses typically do require some user action, and worms just work on their own. Bots are programs that run automatically without requiring a person to start or stop it. It can be used for all kinds of things: backdoors, DOS attacks, right? Launching objectionable content, maybe trying to get them free ad revenue, things like that, or actually destroy damaged data, system files. And then more recently, the ransomware. This is where the software encrypts data, typically the user's data, or locks their system until a ransom is paid. Typically, they use payment as an untraceable cryptocurrency. It can be really devastating for companies and even users, but mostly they target companies to ransom, get some money for their data, because they need their data to do their business. Here's an example of some ransomware. Send $5,000 worth of Bitcoin here, and to get your system unlocked. Malware, right? So it is just annoying. It's usually encrypted to help prevent detection. It's stealthy, disguised as legitimate programs. It'll change every time they transfer to a new system. May be programmed to activate on certain dates, can be dormant and harmless until that date arrives. Sometimes they're triggered by logic bombs, so you do something or some certain condition that's met, and then it goes off. And it can have one or more of these characteristics. Right, different types of organizations will have different security risks. Posture assessment is just examining every aspect of your network to determine what might be compromised, what's your risk, right? And this should be performed at least annually. You should have a security audit, is an assessment performed by a company that's been accredited, and has skills in this and doing an audit, and knows how to assess a network. A lot of times, the larger companies will have an internal audit team, but then they'll also hire third-party auditors to still audit and get a outside review of the networks. Right, so during a posture assessment, you're trying to use some of the methods a hacker uses, right? You're trying to do a vulnerability assessment, right? So some of the types, vulnerability scanning. Some you'll do logged in as if somebody had already compromised the system, and some where you're not logged in, you're unauthenticated, and then you try to see what vulnerabilities somebody with no access has, right? And then you'll do some penetration testing. And there's some tools that you can use that try to exploit and find and exploit network vulnerabilities to test your network to see how accessible it is to hackers. So on the pen testing, you typically have red teams, blue teams, right? So the red team would conduct the attack while the blue team tries to defend the network. So, and then there's just tons of different scanning tools, trying to find the information about the host services, types of OSs, what ports are open, closed, or filtered, right? Because a port can report it's open, it's closed, or you can get no answer. The no answer is ideal, but of course you have to have some ports that are open or they don't work, right? But existence, types, placements, and configurations, firewalls, all this you're trying to figure out as a potential hacker or a pen tester. Then you're trying software configurations. What's unencrypted. Can you sniff what's called sniffing the network and grab sensitive data that's not encrypted. One of the more popular tools for scanning a network is Nmap, called the Network Mapper, and it's designed to scan large networks, but you've got to be careful with the settings because you can bring down a network because it can overscan. Many networks will sound alarms, if you start scanning the network. Hopefully, it's set up to where it knows about this. But it is a free tool. You can download it, and it provides all kinds of information about networks and hosts. Nessus, right, can perform more sophisticated scans than Nmap. Metasploit also can scan, but also help exploit. So it's got some potentials for exploiting as well. And this is just showing the Metasploit detecting a router's admin username and password, right? So it's admin and password's 1234, so it's real secure, but it's out there in the clear text. Honeypots, we try sometimes to set up machines that nobody should have access to because it does nothing, and it's it's just out there, and we don't secure it, and we try to see if somebody accesses it, because if they access it, then we know there's somebody out there doing things that they shouldn't be doing because nobody should be accessing it. So it's called a honeypot because it looks really good. It's inviting for a hacker, and then if somebody actually accesses it, right, then we know that we've got somebody doing things on our network that they shouldn't be. And we could even have a whole network of systems like this, and tries to decoy, right, and fake it out. And then if anybody accesses that, then we know they're up to no good. And there's some physical security that we could actually take upon ourselves, right? Like only allowing trusted staff access to the data rooms and computers. locking our doors, and having security guards, things like that. Um, and then, right, so then having good detection measures in place for when somebody does breach a security perimeter. Cameras, so you can have door access keypads or cipher locks, key fobs, access badges, proximity cards, right? So you don't require direct contact. You just got to be in within a certain distance. Or maybe we even got it so secure we've got biometrics, finger or retina scanning access. And here's just some of those. You need a badge to enter into the entire IT room, and then badge in again to get into the data center. Fingerprint scanning. Right, so you have motion detection, video cameras, right? Asset tracking. You can have RFID tags on your computer equipment and things like that. And things go off if they leave the building. All kinds of different ways of securing things. You got the single-use plastic security seal, to guarantee that it has been tampered with. Like I said, you got some RFID labels on the box that allows us to track its progress, where it is, if it were to leave. Right, so you just, what do you need to secure? Who needs access? Who needs approval? Does somebody go and make security checks? What do you have a plan to respond to breaches? There's all kinds of things that you need to be asking and planned ahead of time. Right, so device hardening, right? So you definitely want to make sure that your known vulnerabilities are patched whenever possible. You have many layers of defenses, such as the firewalls, intrusion detections, devices, other monitoring, event logs that you're scanning and looking at those. The physical access security, you have all kinds of device hardening process. Let's see here. Right. Then managing security patches, making sure that they're on time. Right. If you're managing remotely, making sure you're doing so with secure channels like SSH, and encrypting your communications. The most privileged account types, you need to make sure that it's very limited in who has it. Maybe even require them to only use it at certain times. They have two accounts, a non-privileged account and a privileged account. You just want to limit all of this. Maybe limit the times that it can be used. All kinds of things that you can do to try to limit administrative access. Right, and then with device hardening, right, turn off any services or protocols that aren't needed. Basically each service or protocol that's enabled on a server or a device is a potential door in. So you want to be able to lock and shut down or remove doors, if you will, to your systems, right? So closing ports that aren't needed, removing services that are needed, minimize the number of programs that start up, right? And then if you don't need a device, remove it, right? Disable or uninstall applications that are no longer needed. Getting into some other methods here. So hashing. is basically a one-way algorithm, right? So I can reduce the space, but it's also a way to confirm um, that data hasn't been tampered. So if you have a file or executable or anything like that, you can hash it, and the algorithm will develop a hash, a very long number, um, and it's unique that if you change a single space in the code or the file or anything, you'll get a completely different number. So it's a way of verifying that a file hasn't been tampered with. Um, and secured hash algorithm is one of the more common. It's resistance to collisions, and like I said, that unique hash. A collision would be as if you can have two different files that are completely different produce the same number. That's a collision. And so the advantages of SHA is it's very resistant. A different file, two different files should never create the same number. And we have different versions, 0, 1, 2, and 3. And then 2 and 3 are often implemented together for increased security. Then we have some anti-malware software, to help provide us protection against getting malware. And then, of course, you want to definitely monitor the network and educate your users. Training helps a lot because people are one of our weakest links. We do a very good job of hardening our devices and securing devices for the most part. A lot of times our weakest link, though, is users. Right, so some symptoms of malware, right? File size increases, unusual error messages, unexplained rebooting, memory usage, and display quality fluctuations, and then, of course, overall system performance decline, right? Unexplained performance decline. Right, so where do we install this, right? Do we install it on every computer, or do we do a server installation or a network device, cloud-based? There's definitely a balancing act of performance impact versus production and cost, right? Because do you install it on every computer, if you got 100,000 computers, or do you just do it on the network, but it slows down your network, server-based, you just protect the data, there's all kinds of decisions to be made. Security policies, right? So identify our security goals, risks, authority levels, designate security coordinator, and team members, right? So it's policies are high level security directives, right, on how we should act, how we should use the internet, or how do we what's our password management process, do we require passwords, things like that. These are high level policies, and we're trying to educate our users on how to use our equipment and technology at a high level. These are what our and then the administration and CEOs and CIOs, they sign off on these and are responsible for the policies. And then from policies, you'll get procedures and guidance from that flow down from the policies. Right. So, but like I said, they're high level. Policies are high level, so they're not going to specify hardware, software, architecture, or protocols. They're just going to give guidance on potential risks, like that we should use secure passwords. The standards and procedures that flow out of the policy, they'll start describing the hardware software architecture and how to actually be secure. But the policies are high level guidance. What are we trying to achieve? Right, so the goals. What is our goals? Prevent unauthorized user access, protect our data, create secure environments, communicate the employee responsibilities, right? Who need, we want approvals for getting access to sensitive data, that we encrypt sensitive data, or things like that. Right, strategy. So we'll probably have some committees, right? And you'll assign a security coordinator to drive the policy creations. You'll need people that understand the risk. You'll have to have some posture assessments or network assessments. You're going to do some risk assessments and rate the severity and likelihood of each threat, because a threat. It could be very destructive or damaging, but rarely occur. Whereas you may have something that is moderately damaging, but it's very likely to occur. So you're the one that may almost never happen, you may just mitigate with insurance or something, whereas the one that's moderate, that's likely to happen, you may want to take some action and buy some devices or implement a solution or create a solution to prevent that from happening, because it's more likely to happen and more, in the end, going to cost you more than the one that each incident is big but rarely happens, or if never would, may never happen, versus the one that is almost guaranteed to happen, right? So you need to rate and the likelihood, not only that, what would happen if it does, but how often and how likely is it to happen. Bring your own device. So this was a big challenge for IT, to be able to bring in mobile devices and other devices, employee-owned devices, because this brings in so many unknowns to your network, let alone security and legal compliance is concerned, especially if you're dealing with customer sensitive data, banking data, health data, things like this. And if you don't have actual control over the device, how do you safeguard the customer's data, things like that? There's a lot of issues here at play by allowing the employees to bring in their own devices. But we've got a lot of new software, mobile device management software, that can help us segment off company data from personal data. It gives us the ability to wipe devices and monitor devices, and enforce passwords and things like that as if we own the device. So it's gotten a lot better. Acceptable use policy. So this is an example of a policy, right? So it just kind of gives, high level what the users can and can't do, explains penalties for violations, describes how these measures protect the network. Some restrictions, right? Don't do anything illegal, don't forward spam email, don't violate copyright, trade secret. As you can see, these are all high level. They don't explain details of what you would do, or how you would do it, or what devices, but it's at a high level. So it's the acceptable use policy, and most organizations will have one. They should have one anyway. And then others don't export software. Don't maybe it won't install any software that's not approved, or um, don't use company resources for personal business, things like that. Um, and report any suspected compromises. A non-disclosure agreement. So this is an NDA, and you'll have this where employees will probably have to sign this, especially working on confidential or private organization data, or especially happens when you're dealing with other companies, and you're giving your company secrets or giving them access to help you do things. They'll sign the NDAs. So that you're promising not to disclose what you learn, right? So, right, and they give you an example of a hospital, right? You sign an NDA not to disclose somebody's health information or things like that. Password policies, right? Should be, they should have a password policy just like the acceptable use policy. But like I say, at a high level, right? They give an idea how to make a secure password. Don't use the username, your name, nickname. Don't try to use a word that is in the dictionary. Use at least longer than 8 characters. And then tips for making and keeping passwords secure: change it frequently. Do not reuse passwords after they've expired. Use different passwords for different applications and things like that. Privileged user agreement or privileged access agreement. So you may need certain rules, restrictions, and consequences for violations for administrative staff or support staff that have privileged access or higher level access than normal. And they should only sign in as long as necessary to perform the task and then sign out. They should have a more stricter password policy. Maybe instead of 8 characters, maybe they have to have 16 or more, right? And maybe you have to have 2-factor authentication, things like that. Training for your admins, definitely, to avoid social engineering attacks, and then monitoring privileged access, right? Right, so anti-malware policy, you have some rules for using the anti-malware, for installing, rules for installing programs, sharing files, using external disks, right? And policy that says that users should not disable the anti-malware, or anti-malware team should focus on maintaining the anti-malware, things like that. These are policies, like I said, they're high level. And that is our